So let's get started. Bonjour, hi, welcome to the stream to All Around Azure, episode 38 today. Super happy about that. I have a fantastic guest, first time, so that will be pretty cool. I'm Frank Boucher, I'm a Microsoft Cloud Advocate, and today with me I have another Microsoft Cloud Advocate. I have Shannon. Welcome aboard, Shannon.
Thank you for having me.
So Shannon, she's more IT pro, am I correct to say that?
Correct.
Or more...
Correct. I think these days, though, all of us IT pros are trying to figure out how to hit REST APIs. That's always my joke, right? And so we're kind of in that weird in-between world. And I tell you what, I've done things that if you would have come to me 5-10 years ago and said I'd be at Microsoft, people would be trusting the cloud, and I'd probably be hitting REST APIs, I don't think I would have believed you. But here I am.
Wonderful. And I'm super happy to have you. We've been chatting about all the things she want to show you today. Very excited. So the topic will be Azure Storage. A little bit of theory. We have a bunch of different slides. Try to show you in practice also what it's worth. So we'll be jumping from slides to have some kind of visuals and a clear story, and tons of little demo or demonstration of where are things in the Azure portal. So at any time, chat, if you have question, ask them in the chat. And are we still live? Yes. Ask them in the chat. I will I will communicate your question in case Shannon is in the zone and doesn't see the chat. Do you see the chat? I forgot if you told me.
I do see the chat. Yeah, I do see the chat.
Okay.
So, but in the event I don't, because I'm looking on a different screen,
yeah,
it doesn't
we'll keep track on that.
Okay.
That's
Perfect.
my job. That's why I'm here. So we'll do that. So let's get started then. So we'll
Sounds
share
good.
your screen. And Azure Storage. We see the cover right now. So we'll let you go
awesome.
now.
Perfect. So thanks for the invitation. My name is Shannon Kuehn. It's pronounced Kuehn, and I'm on the Enterprise Platforms and Tools team. One of the conversations that we have a lot of is kind of surrounding storage and how to make use of storage. I also had worked with the PG pretty closely about a year ago at this time, and so I definitely have some good knowledge to share, and hopefully you find it really fascinating. Definitely feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I always try and post good content there. We'll take it away. So we'll start here with the overview. So the Azure Storage Platform is Microsoft's cloud storage solution for modern data storage scenarios. Mm-hmm. They is essentially built into these 5 different buckets. So disk storage, object storage, file storage, data transport, and hybrid storage. I didn't even realize we had this many lines of delineation inside the storage team, but I guess it makes sense if you think about the ways in which to make use of Azure Storage. So, basically our storage story, because it's a story, right? It's durable and it's highly available. It's also redundant. There's a lot of redundancy built into the platform. So you don't have to think about plotting out what your disk array is going to look like, right? You abstract a lot of that for customers coming in and making use of it. So I wanted to start with this slide just to sort of set the stage. And then I go into this slide here because I think this is pretty relevant. So we have the IaaS side of the coin here, which is disks, files, anything that had an iSCSI disk attached, anything that had a file share that you wanted to migrate over. All of that lives in the IaaS space. And so for IT pros, this is a very comfortable spot for us to find ourselves in. There's also the PaaS model here, right? And we've got objects, tables, and queues. And objects itself, I didn't really even realize how much of that story is told best by developers because of the fact that sometimes you just need storage to store your files. My mind kind of blew up a little bit going through this weird sort of windy turn, trying to figure out all of the architecture at play here. But objects themselves are, things like pictures, MP4s, MP3s, unstructured data sets. There's also a conversation now to be had surrounding data analytics with ADLS Gen 2 that sits on blob storage. From there, there's tables, right? I don't know enough about this realm, but it's the NoSQL store that everything sort of sits on top of. And then the queues side of the coin is the reliable queues when you think about cloud services. So if you need to make sure that messages get transferred in between or into and out of applications, you could lean on the queues storage as well.
And people may not realize, but the storage is the foundation of everything on Azure.
Correct.
Like even at Microsoft, it's used in so many different services that you don't know about it, but like Azure storage is everywhere.
Correct. And I think, it's one of the oldest services of Azure,
also,
right?
Yes,
so when Azure started, it was storage, networking, worker roles and
web roles.
Web roles? Okay. I was a little bit before my time. But but it's interesting to see the fact that it's still around and some of the tenets in which that we built this out as part of Microsoft, right? And it's the proverbial I didn't build it. But we're still embracing some of those distributed computing concepts. So when we think about objects, this is everything from, cloud native applications. So IoT, AI, autonomous driving, genomics, media, etc. Data analytics, right? So ADLS Gen 2 and backup and archive, which is also another comfortable area for the IT pros. So it was interesting, like prior to working with the blob storage team, my only exposure was through backup and archive. Well, there's a ton of other stories to tell related to object storage. And then when we talk about disks, it's anything that's a legacy type solution, right? Leaning on a virtual machine. So it's got, a direct attached disk. It's got a local disk, iSCSI disk. Those are great candidates for Azure VMs. Sometimes there are business critical workloads that require high performance and low latency, and maybe they're not really ready yet for cloud native solutions, right? So Azure VMs is another spot to land that application when you think about transforming and moving that application into Azure. And then there's also the concept here of moving anything that lived on a SAN. That's always was kind of my joke when I work with customers. If you had something that lived on a SAN, it was a great candidate for an Azure VM. And then when you think about files, think of it like legacy Windows files or a NAS share, right? You could move that into Azure and not have to have an actual VM exposing that file share. So you could have a file share without the VM. It sounds pretty awesome. There are some caveats, and I'll go through that a little bit later here, but this is a pretty awesome reality. Plus, there's a whole concept here of the Azure File Sync service. So if you had a larger data set, 5 terabytes, 10 terabytes, you could start offloading that storage into Azure based upon a schedule, or actually it wouldn't be necessarily a schedule. Well, it actually would be. It would be date and timestamps. Then you'd migrate that into Azure and you'd be storing less on-prem. So you could start to think about reducing the actual storage footprint that all of these services kind of live on, right? So as more and more customers are embracing the cloud, there's interesting ways to think about making use of any one of these scenarios.
Yeah, because when you're using the cloud, everything doesn't need to be in the cloud right away. You could be just,
Correct.
Freeing a little bit the server you have in the office and moving like the old backup or like some tiny little app or like maybe a big one, but like that is used less frequently and stuff like that in the cloud. So like that's
right.
Perfect for that. Like just moving data, backups, images, logs, file that you keep just in case, but that you don't use that often. Like you could just clean up the place like that.
Yeah, I even had a customer think about this with an AKS cluster. They needed to actually go look at log files regularly for the application. I don't quite remember all of the intricacies of the app, but they were able to make use of a premium Azure file share because it gave them flexibility of being able to have performance storage and a spot to land things so that they didn't have to just kind of discard that and move forward. It was helpful for them. So there's so many different ways to think about, making use of storage. And then if you think about it too, a lot of our PaaS-based services have storage built in. So Cosmos DB, right? All the SKUs have storage built in. You don't have to worry about where your database is landing. It's going to land on the right performance storage based upon the SKU you select.
Yeah. And are you familiar with Twitch, Shannon?
Sort of. Sometimes.
You know what a RAID is?
Like a storage RAID?
Nope.
Or
We just being raid right now, so it's a full channel. So it's the Visual Studio channel, so another Twitch channel that come join us with 47, a party of 47 viewers.
Oh, I see
so they
that.
just jumped on our show. So welcome, raiders. She's Shannon, I'm Frank, and today for the next hour and a half, for the next hour, we're talking about all things storage. And you may think, storage is boring. But I would say you're wrong. Storage
it's actually cooler than you think.
Super important because it's everywhere. So we're just getting started. So you join at the perfect timing. So we're just talking now about files and how you could make some room in your server. So at any point, if you have any questions, drop your question in the chat. It's a safe space. There's no stupid questions, only sad faces, and if you don't ask it. So ask
and I was
your
going to say,
question
if I don't know an answer, Frank might know an answer, and if neither of us know an answer, we could always follow up with an answer, maybe on Twitter.
It's a really good question, and we'll get back to you. That's for sure.
Let's play Stump the Chump, right? That was always the joke that we would. I used to work with customers more often, and we would show up on site, and we had to bring an army of folks that knew Azure because it wasn't just storage, right? It's storage, networking, development, databases, etc., and it was always Stump the Chump. So I always appreciate a good Stump the Chump. So I'll start here by talking a little bit about blob storage, mostly because of the fact I think this is a pretty interesting story to tell. I really find it even more fascinating after having worked with the engineering teams very closely over the course of the last year and some change at this point. So, it's the object storage solution of Azure. It's optimized really for storing a ridiculous amount of data, unstructured data at that, right? So this doesn't have a particular data model or definition. So MP4s, MP3s, a lot of the actual services that are showing up here in the slide, everything lives on blob storage. It's kind of a cool reality if you think about it, but there's so many layers of abstraction that you could go deal with the blob storage account if you wanted to, or you could live in AKS, or you could live in Cosmos DB, right? That's the beauty of having this sit as the distributed kind of foundational storage layer of Azure.
I'm reading your wheel right now.
I know, and it was kind of a cool one, and it's funny because people will read the whole thing, kind of move their head around, and
it's pretty cool. I think it's the first time I see that. Like the storage presented that way. So I think it's a cool one.
Yeah, I liked it because of the fact that it is very circular. It's not like a linear sort of solution by any stretch of the definition. And you can think about all the different engines that sit on top of it as well, and all the different endpoints. And I don't know, it's super fascinating. And my mind blew up a bunch, when I was talking to the storage team over the course of my time working very closely with them, just because of the fact that, I thought I knew storage, and I went and I worked with them, and I didn't know storage at all, because at the end of it, I was like, I have so much more appreciation for what we're doing on the distributed layer inside of our storage infrastructure. And it blobs for days, right? That was always the thing. So, but yeah, so if you think about it, really, it's kind of like an endless sort of scenario. You don't have to worry about storage. You can if you want to. Like I said, if you want to go spin up a storage account, I'll walk through some of the scenarios, show you how easy it is to create files and upload them, and what it's like to hit the raw APIs directly and things of that sort. But I mean, you can also sit a little higher up the stack and focus less on it as well. So it's really a matter of what makes the most use or makes the most sense for you as you're building out applications or working with different scenarios and patterns. So this is a pretty awesome layer that I don't think gets a lot of attention, unfortunately. And I think it's something that's, given the fact that it sits in this abstracted layer, because we don't have, the storage, like the SAN administrators, their job changes ever so slightly with the cloud, right? They have to kind of understand how to present storage, but it's a much different reality. So I'll talk a little bit about the different layers here, because just like everything, there's layers. So there's the front end layer, right? That's dealing with auth requests, import, export, client libraries. The .NET SDK is a pretty rich SDK. The other SDKs are just right almost at parity, I think, with .NET. Again, I'm not really a developer. I just play one on TV. But the reality here, though, is it's a very open sort of scenario. And so whether you're programming in Java or Go or .NET, right? You have an SDK that can help you make use of hitting Azure Storage, because without it, you're going to have to formulate your headers correctly, and it's kind of a pain. I'll walk through some of that later. That was one of my little exercises. It was go hit the raw APIs directly. And ever since, I always show it because it's kind of a pain. And if you had to formulate your calls that way every single time, I bet you'd be a little frustrated. So the SDKs are fantastic, and they continue to evolve and shift and change. And then the SMB client endpoints are there as well. Underneath there, you get all the different endpoints, right? So each storage account comes with a blob and disk endpoint, a table endpoint, a queue endpoint, and a file share endpoint, where whether or not you use it's up to you, but you get it by way of building out the storage account. Underneath that layer is the scale out layer, so to speak. It's the partition mapping, right? So when we build out storage accounts, we only care about what the storage account name is and what the container names are. Those have to be globally unique. You could have a billion different files outside of that. We're only matching on those first two things, and that's because we're doing this at scale, right? So that layer underneath all of the endpoints, that's what focuses on mapping everything correctly so that we can then present the data that you're looking to extract or store in a way that's highly available and strongly consistent. At the very lowest level here is the distributed replication layer. This is how you're getting those replicas to go, because every single storage account, you'll get 3 replicas, whether or not you know it, right? Other storage accounts like GRS or ZRS, you have replication patterns that either happen asynchronously to a different region, or to a paired region, I should say, or to synchronously to a different zone within the same region, right? So you get a couple of additional copies. But this layer right here, the very lowest layer, that's what actually handles all of the bit rot, all of the replicas, all of the kind of the management, so to speak, of storing all of the files and objects, etc.
And you just dropped a few acronyms there, DRR. That's the type of replication. Like when you pick your storage, you could decide that, I want it, replicated in different region and stuff like that. It's just different level of distribution. That's why it's part of the distribution. So it makes sense when you're building a new storage. That's when you will do that selection.
Correct. And I've linked this. I don't know how you do this, Frank. I didn't even think about this. So I think I gave you this link to help promote this session. But this is essentially a white paper that Microsoft worked very closely with R&D teams on, surrounding how we do what we do related to distributed storage at scale.
So that was the PDF? Sorry.
Correct. Yeah. So that's the PDF. And so what's kind of cool is, you look at that date and you think 2011. That was almost 10 years ago. Well, P.S., it's changed ever so slightly, but it's still fundamentally relevant. And if you can get through a white paper, I applaud you and I salute you, because it's not an easy reality, but it's a really fascinating look at how we do storage. And it's definitely worthwhile to share with folks in the chat.
I shared it in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the hierarchy here.
You want to show where it is in the portal?
The portal?
You have a portal.
Oh yeah, actually, maybe that makes more sense. Hang on, let's do this. So let me go into here. Got a VM. It's got all my stuff on it. I was just joking that I had a profile problem on my work machine, so it's like I got a new machine, but I didn't get a new machine. That was my joke earlier today. Okay, so let's go into. Let's see here. Let me do something. I see what it is. It's because I'm sharing the screen. 2 seconds here. Oh man, is this?
You want to remove the blue bar?
Yeah, well, let me
just unpin it.
Yeah, I'll unpin it. Let's see if that works. The problem is this is my actual local desktop, not the desktop of the, let's see. Let me...
You mean the blue background, that's your real desktop?
Well, what's crazy is
Oh, it's the same background?
This is my background. So you can tell I just rebuilt it, right? And this is just a regular one here. Let me do a couple of things. Everything's sitting on this VM, so my apologies here. Let me try and...
Yeah, we'll go with Electric, Avoc, and Furbo here. I think we found that you are very original in your wallpaper.
This is what comes when you install Windows. I don't know.
I think that's the first thing I always change, like, so I know, like, okay, like I'm on that machine.
So let's see. So automatically hide the taskbar in tablet mode. There we go.
But the VM
and that is my thing from earlier. Hang on, that's my picture from earlier. There we go. There we go. Maybe. Let's see.
Lovely cats.
What is the deal here? It's not. All right, let me try one more thing here.
Unshare your screen.
Oh, there we go.
So
nope, there we go. It's working.
Okay.
It's working.
Okay.
So I've got this resource group here. I'm going to stick in this resource group. It's just easier. I've got too many resource groups. I don't know if you feel that way, Frank. Sometimes I'm thinking to myself,
I don't know what
maybe
you're
I should
talking
clean up.
about.
Yeah, I know that never happens, right? So let's look for a storage account.
Yes. Let's create a new one. Storage account.
I swear this is super cool. All right, so we'll leave it in the resource group. We'll call this Shan Storage 1. Actually, let's make sure it's 0000001. Yeah, because I'm pretty positive. I play around with storage too much. Basically, I need a life, Frank. Maybe being on the stream will help. Okay, so we can choose standard or premium. I will leave it at standard, but premium is great for things like Azure File Share. So if you want to get a more performant file share, that's a really great way to think about leaning on premium storage. For purposes of everything that I'm working on right now, we don't need to think about picking premium. We can keep the storage v2. So these are
the other options. So
so these are the legacy options.
Oh.
So there's blob storage or storage v1, and so there's not much fundamentally that changes between each one of these SKUs. Minus one thing, right? So all new cool features of Azure Storage won't come to V1 or blob storage. So I guess that's the one caveat, right?
Well, if you're today creating a new storage, you should go general purposes V2. Right?
Correct. That's where you can think about adding on access tiers, lifecycle management, blob tiering, etc. But yeah, so the idea is to stay with the latest and greatest. And if you had an older storage account, let's say you are working for a firm that's been in Azure for a number of years, and you realize they've got a bunch of blob storage or general purpose V1 accounts, switching it's pretty straightforward. I think you could do it in the portal and via PowerShell. Yep. So, and then let's take a look at the replication patterns too.
And
so I was talking
the
about
acronym you mentioned earlier.
Yep,
so now we have the meaning on the side. So that's why, like, earlier you were just dropping a bunch of acronyms, and now we can see. So, like, that's why I meant, like, when you're creating a storage, like, it's easier to understand now. So, okay, I want this, I want that.
Right. Cool. And so locally redundant storage, you'll get 3 copies in an actual data center that you choose, right? So, or the region, I should say, that you choose, right? So it'll be replicated 3 times. The zone redundant storage, that is essentially replicated 3 times in one of the data centers within a region, and then it's replicated synchronously to another data center in the same region. So most of our regions have multiple data centers, and that's kind of a cool reality. If you're dealing with, you want to have resilient storage, you could think about zone redundant storage. Geo-redundant storage, what that does is you get 3 copies locally and then an asynchronous copy to a paired region. So every region in Azure has a paired region. And what that basically means, without going into the weeds, is in the event that you had something like, I'm trying to think of the best, so like a DR scenario, right? Let's say Microsoft had to declare disaster
on
recovery.
The East Coast
right.
of America, like you have the other paired is on Central or West, so you have your other paired. Yep.
It'll be X amount of miles in a different spot. You shouldn't have to worry about it sharing a power grid because they don't, right? So if it's a power outage, a power grid issue, you should be fine. And then it's an asynchronous copy, so you will lose a little bit of data, but it's better than having nothing. So, and when we have these conversations with customers, we'll usually talk them through the whole scenario, right? So, and that's why, you've got things like geo-zone redundant storage. So you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting GRS and zone redundant storage inside one SKU. Now you're going to be paying a little bit more for it, right? But you get a higher availability and an SLA. And if that's something that's important to your firm or the app that you're supporting or the workload you're supporting, that's another option as well. And then the read access components here, what that gives you is it gives you an opportunity to see what's happening in that paired region. You can't write to it, but you have opportunities to go see how close to real time that data is. And so maybe you might have to do a failover yourself, right? That was an opportunity now, especially with customer controlled failover.
Could you say, use it also for example, if Canada is very wide east-west, so could I use that and have like a copy read-only in the other side, on the other coast, so my client that are on that coast have a closer version, and it will be only read-only. So for consuming the information, it will be fast. And if they are creating a new invoice or whatever, like doing an insert, that then they will hit the whatever data center, like the primary one, so it could be slower.
Correct. Yeah. So that's another thing to think about as well.
Could be all.
And it helps with load, right? And there's so many different ways to think about it as well. But yeah, that's another way to think about it. If that's an application or a type of scenario that you're looking to support folks going in and having read access. Yep. So that's another way to think about it. So I'll pick geo-redundant storage mostly because it's kind of a cool reality. I'll leave this at hot. There are different tiers, so I'll talk about that briefly here. There's hot, cool, and then archive.
And hot cool, it's not cool, dude.
It's. I wish it was cool, dude. Then people would be like, I want to listen to storage about your stories about storage. No, cool is more like less frequently accessed data, and there's a whole concept. Well, no, because that cold would be archive. Cold would be archive. Yeah,
I thought it was hot, cold, and archive. That's why I'm joking. I thought it was a typo in the portal.
No. It's cool. It's cool. Hot, cool. So other vendors like I think Google and AWS, I think they have cold. I think. I'm actually not positive what all their SKUs are anymore. I knew it a little bit more readily, but I think they've got like Arctic and cold and their designation. But yeah, no, we call it cool.
Okay.
And it's the idea that it's less frequently accessed data. Like the recommendation is, you wouldn't want to go access it. Like if you go access that data every day, leave it in hot. It's going to cost you less. If you continue to go dip into your cool, eventually you're going to be paying a little bit of a penalty to continue to get that data. But storing it, it's fantastic to think about using cool.
Most of the stuff will always be hot. It's just cold. Cool is really when like you're archiving, you don't think you may use it, but you might in the week or in the month. And archive is really think about the tape. Previously, when we were like putting stuff on tape and it was taking time like minutes or hours to get it back mounted and everything. So archive, you should think like that. It's really for archiving. It's not we'll run a query and do stuff.
Yeah, it's when your auditors come knocking. That was always my joke to customers. Like, you want to make sure you've got a copy of your data sitting somewhere, and you don't necessarily have to have it sit in hot or cool. It could go live in archive, and archive's very inexpensive. Yeah. But now to retrieve it, that takes a little bit of time. You could pay a little bit extra and get priority retrieval. But usually when you need something from archive, you're giving it to your auditors, and nobody really likes auditors. Sorry. Customers don't really like auditors, but they're a part of this world. So we've got to have something for them, right? And why not give them an archive SKU so that you're not paying a ton of money to store your data to meet your regulatory compliance, and then you're able to then pull it out of archive and hand it to your auditors or hand it to whomever needs it. Maybe you're in a legal hold 5 years after it's been archived, right? That would be a good candidate for archive as well.
And IMS DevOps says that he thinks V1 was recommended for site recovery.
I think you're right. I know that was supposed to be changing. I'm just not positive if it did. Okay. So, but yeah, you're right. That was it's because of the fact that there's different engineering teams, different charters for those teams. I know it's being worked on at some point, but it's a matter of I don't think it's quite there yet. So I think if you're building out Azure Site Recovery and you're leaning on it from a replication pattern from on-prem into Azure, it'll have you set it up with a V1 account. I believe if it's Azure IaaS, it's just replicating the managed disk. And now that I think about it too, you can set it up so it's replicating to a managed disk from on-prem. That's also an option. Yeah. So if you wanted to bypass storage entirely and just go directly to a managed disk, you now have capacity to do that, which is kind of cool. Because that's the direction that everybody wants all of our customers to go. Unmanaged was what we used to have. We have managed now, and managed is just more aligned correctly. You don't have to worry about too many IOPS in one storage account, all the contention you had to think about, all of the mathematics you had to run in order to make sure your workloads could be functional. Pick a managed disk, and Microsoft will handle all of that responsibility for you and place your environment on the right spot, right? So that you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. And Janice Q7 is just try to...
Ice cool eyes. Hey, I like it. I like it. I like it. I often feel like we need more creative ways to name some stuff, because I think we have a lot of duplicative acronyms, unfortunately. Oh, yeah. But then then we need some more creative ways of thinking about how to name this. But
we definitely have some good vibe in the chat here for creativity.
Good. So I'll move to the next screen here.
Yes.
And for right now, I'm going to leave it as a public endpoint, but and I'll kind of show how public endpoint and private endpoint work. I've got a good way of showcasing that a little bit later here, but this is just to get you comfortable with what this looks like. I'll leave it as a public endpoint. This is a PaaS service. Mm-hmm. So prior to things like service endpoints or public endpoints or private endpoints, whatever you want to call it, because our customers do call it service endpoints or private endpoints, you had to think about building out an express route with Microsoft peering. And you had to think about BGP routing. And customers either were really awesome with that or they weren't the greatest, and it's nobody's fault at all. And so this is a way to think about less of the complexity related to how your networking gear translates everything on-prem, and more of leaning again on Microsoft to handle all of that translation for you. So now all you have to think about is doing the actual private peering, and you could enable a private endpoint, and then your storage gets a private IP versus the public IP that shows up. And I'll leave it on Microsoft routing by default. And usually Microsoft networking routing is recommended for customers. In fact, every customer I've ever worked with, this is the direction that we go. But I'm assuming, given the fact that we have a choice, there are customers out there that have chosen to lean on internet-based routing.
So Dust New Zealand is asking, are you aware if a new data center is coming in New Zealand? Do you know if it's currently delayed or something? I have no clue.
I don't know. I know, I thought I had seen a post, but I could be crossing the streams, so to speak. I'm not sure. I could have thought I saw something, but I don't know what the latest and the greatest is.
It was announced pre-COVID. Then stay tuned. I'm assuming it will eventually, be announced.
Got it. Okay. So then I must have seen something posted either on LinkedIn or Twitter talking about it. So hang tight. Hopefully we've got it situated. It's a good thing it's not my responsibility. I'd probably be stressing. So I'll click on data protection, right? So this is one way to think about protecting yourself, right? So think about how easy it is to authenticate into Azure, and I'll showcase how easy it is to upload storage into Azure, upload files. If you don't have soft delete turned on, you might be in a little bit of a world of hurt. This is a fantastic thing to turn on. You have capacity, I think it's up to 90 days, I think is the limit. Let me try it. Let's see if I can go to 100. I think it used to be 90. Maybe they're increasing it, so that's great. This will be soft delete for all blobs. Let's see. Yeah, so it's on a per subscription basis. I'm using my Microsoft subscription, so I don't have this enabled, but you can also turn on soft delete for containers as well. So Blob is the bigger piece. Think of that as your storage account. The container is one level underneath, and I'll showcase how that shows up in like Azure Storage Explorer as well. Because I think, thinking about it in a layered situation like this, maybe that makes sense. But you can turn on soft delete for blobs and for containers.
Okay.
You can also turn it on for file shares, which is really, this is probably the one I see turned on the most, because end users are usually accessing a file share, right? And if we can trust end users, yeah. Oh, well, that's right. Yeah,
I'm at dev level, so I'm always with the blobs. So.
you
That's
had
another reality.
So yeah, so this is something that would have been awesome for me in previous roles. And in fact, what we'd have to do is we have to make sure that we ran our file share backups at least once a day, because inadvertently somebody would accidentally delete something or save over a file. And so this will save you from that reality, especially because you have capacity now to spin up a file share without having a VM, which is a super cool reality. Your administrator should hopefully feel a little bit more confident that it could potentially work for them in that realm. So it's a much neater reality than having to go patch another server, right? Because
would you describe very loosely, whatever, like very with an open mind, the file share has a private OneDrive, Dropbox, something like that?
You can definitely do that. Now, I used to work for firms where we had like a personal drive. In fact, one of my firms, we called it the J drive, right? That was just how we presented it to end users. That would have been a better candidate for OneDrive. That's like personal files. So if you're keeping track of things, maybe you're putting together a reason to get a promotion, right? You're keeping track of a log of what you're working on, or you have stuff that you're working on that you don't necessarily want to share just yet with the broader team because you're trying to build something and you're it's kind of a work in progress. That would be a better reality for OneDrive. In fact, most firms are turning that on now, especially if they have bought into the Office 365 ecosystem. Now, file shares themselves, mapping it for end users and having them hit kind of like a communal drive, that's where this would show up more so than like OneDrive, for instance. And I think that would be kind of like the line of designation, right? OneDrive is a little bit more personal. You could also think about SharePoint too. I mean, if you really wanted to muddy those waters, right? Because SharePoint's another opportunity to think about sharing files inside of like a site collection. Yeah, I'm making up a bunch of words. No, so you could think about sharing specific files, or I'm not sure what you would think about, but team files possibly is the best way to think about it. You could think about using the SharePoint online feature as well. I know. If only we could bleep it. And it was kind of a bad word. I'm like meshing words together. It's fine. We'll recover gracefully. But then I worked with firms too where a team site's just they haven't even gotten to that point of potentially realizing the value of SharePoint Online. And so the reality is they're still kind of in that realm of I have a bunch of Excel files that I need to share out with the team. So then I guess the beauty is you've got options.
Cool.
But I won't turn all this on right now. This is...
And don't worry too much, but just to let you know, in time, we have 30 minutes left.
Ah! Hopefully I can get through it. No, I'm kidding. I know. So,
There's no rush. Like, it's more important, like, if we have questions and stuff, like, so continue. And you know what?
Yeah.
You'll come back.
Cool.
We'll go deeper. I prefer having that, like, having two parts, and we cover and ask all the, and not ask, answer all the questions.
I'm totally good with that. I'm totally good with that because I think these are areas in which, conceptually they probably make some sense, and then the idea of actually seeing it being built, I think that's where it kind of solidifies. I don't know if folks are tuning in. I read a lot of documentation, but until I actually go build it myself or see somebody build it, it's hard for me to conceptualize it fully, right? And so I'm a hands-on learner, visual learner, experience-based learner, and so this is an opportunity to kind of just walk through what this looks like.
Yeah, and sometimes you read the documentation, they say blah, 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 between parentheses or between two commas, except for this part. But like you didn't understand that, and then
Right,
until you
right.
try to do something, it's like, why it's not working like it should be. Then you go back, so yeah,
Yeah,
that ha
exactly.
moment, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then maybe what makes sense too is to maybe split this up, Frank. So I'm definitely game to do that. And we can talk about some of the aha moments surrounding Private Link because I've stubbed my toe with it. I think anybody that's played around with it might have stubbed their toes with it. Even service endpoints, right? So service endpoints are a little bit different. They lock down communication to happen within the Azure VNet, but it doesn't help if you're still living in this hybrid world where you've got end users accessing it on-prem. And so I've got, some VPNs stood up at home because I'm a nerd at heart, like we all are, right? And I could showcase ways in which to, think about Private Link because it's kind of another awesome feature surrounding that hybrid story so that you could think about building out hybrid storage and accessing that storage from on-prem without having to get into Azure first.
Yep.
So the secure transfer, this is HTTPS. It's enabled by default now. If you didn't have something that was sensitive, I'm sure you could think about leaning on disabled. Allow public public access. I like to trip myself up. I always leave it at enabled. You could always disable it. This would be the opportunity to really focus on more security. Right. So if you wanted to think about having your consumers of storage authenticate, this would force that authentication pattern.
Yep.
You could also lean on shared access signature tokens or SaaS tokens. That would be an opportunity. The administrator who provides you that key could time box it. You only have a day, an hour to access that file, the series of files, the data that's been stored there. That's how you would specify that. You could specify the version. Store your storages in Azure. Yes, you could definitely store your storages in Azure. Oh, it's very meta. It works. But yeah, so if you had a specific TLS version you wanted your storage to live on, because maybe there's some sort of CA, certificate authority on-prem, you could think about that, right? I usually leave a lot of these on defaults when I'm spinning things up in front of an audience, right?
Yep.
So Azure File Shares. So the current combination of storage account kind, performance, replication, and location doesn't support the large file shares.
Because we use standard, I think.
Correct. Well, no, we use GRS. So if I were to go back and I were to turn this to LRS, no problem. We could do that. And then we could back it up too. But because of the specific combination, it's grayed out. And then if you are a data analytics fan, which a lot of our customers are now that this is kind of collapsed into one service, you could enable the hierarchical namespace and start building out your storage, your data lake storage in the Generation 2 version of the offering.
Yep.
And then I don't know if you see this down here too. This is kind of cool. So sign up is currently required to utilize the NFS 3 feature on a per subscription basis. Now this is also disabled because of the storage combination I picked, but we can walk through what that looks like. We kind of split this up, Frank. I think it might make some sense to do that actually.
Yeah.
And then if you were, focusing on tags, this is where
tags
you can put
is
that
very
in.
important.
It is.
I use the tags a lot, and I share that many times with the chat. I have a little Azure functions that run every Monday, and that execute a query and return me all the resources that are expired. So when I create resources, I had a tag expired on, and I put a date, like in a week in the future, or 3 week or 3 months in the future, not far. And like it just pop up, and like in my subscription, it just delete everything that is expired. But like in a company, you could just have a report runs, and now you need to go see Patrick and Lucy and all those. Say, hey, like, do you still need that VM? Can I delete it? Can I turn it off? And stuff like that to avoid paying too much. And I do that because you probably do the same thing. You run a bunch of demos, and like then you forget to delete them, and
Correct.
You're just burning your credits.
Correct. Now the function that you run.
Yep.
What's it written in? Is it PowerShell?
Yep.
Or it's PowerShell? Okay.
Oh, I did it because PowerShell was new at that time, but you could do it in many different things. I did it in PowerShells.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I know the PowerShell support has been really awesome. So a lot of folks that were heavy Azure automation users, they've been starting to port that over into Azure Functions,
Yep.
just to play around with it, right?
Yeah, I did it in automation and Azure Functions.
Okay.
But
Which
yeah.
one was easier to set up for you? They're kind of about the same,
I
right?
like Azure Functions, so I knew that already and everything. So I would say Azure Functions. I think right now my only problem was at that time when I wrote that, I was looking forward to have a one-click deploy. Everything is in GitHub, and I was looking like, if you know me by now, you should know that I'm a fan of a one-click button, one-click deploy everything. And it was a little bit complicated because you need permission. You need to give a lot of access because my version is deleting stuff. So you need to have a lot of permission. And like from GitHub, it was kind of a little bit dangerous to do that. So I thought, maybe I should work on a version that just create a report and send an email or something. But, then I forgot.
Yeah.
I didn't spend the time doing it. But the code is there. It's running. You just need to do
tweak it.
2-3 extra steps that are explained, but it's not all automatic.
Yeah,
But
I think
so
that's
tags
the hard
are
thing.
important.
Yeah, that's always the hard thing too. And tags evolve and change. And I know the number now is up from when I was most familiar with it. Like I used to work with customers prior to Microsoft, and we'd work on core enablement. And I think at one point in time, I think it was like 15 or 16 key value pairs. I think it's up. I think it's like closer to 30 now. But yeah, it's a lot of tags, and you could think about building out really interesting reports, especially because everybody's moving from that CapEx model to OpEx. That's the hard part, right? How do we make use of this going forward? And, forcing a tag on a resource is an awesome way to do it. Usually you give your devs 1 or 2 cycles of that, and they will never, ever not have a tag going forward. Same with your ops folks, right? You force them into these habits.
Put some policies, and then you cannot create anything if you don't have at least those 2 or 3 or whatever tags you want.
Exactly.
Like, an owner and an experience. Like an owner, I think that's the basic.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have any question, then you go see that person. Having a date, and having a process it lets you refresh frequently and go ask again, hey, do you still need that server? Because if we wait 6 months or 1 year, maybe that person left, maybe it's running on another project or something like that. So then you know what, I'm not sure we're using that database, but maybe some so let's keep it just in case, because I don't have time right now to go check in details. But like if you're running in that and you know what, like we're moving out, so in 2 weeks we should be done. So then you change the date, push it in like 2 weeks, then you can revisit. So, okay, are you done now? Can we delete it? So that's a very efficient way and not that complicated to do.
No, and I would say the beauty too is there's so many code examples now that exist out there with how to make use of kind of keeping everything tidy and neat, right? When folks first started with Azure back in 2010 and kind of right around that era, this wasn't as rich and robust related to code examples. Now I think the reason why a lot of us, like especially in the IT ops space, feel like we're kind of like part-time devs is because I'm almost never starting from scratch. I can lean on awesome devs, especially at Microsoft, who have come up with something. And I say, hey, I like this something that you came up with, but I want to kind of do something else. Can you kind of point me down this direction, or do you have 30, 40 minutes to kind of walk me through how to kind of get it where it needs to go? Yep. And I think that's the cool reality of where this has all evolved, right? Everything's on GitHub. Folks are very generous with sharing what they've done. And I mean, not even just at Microsoft, right? In the broader community too. I mean, that's an awesome reality.
Yep.
But yeah, so it's as simple as just hitting review and create. It's going to run through the last validation. You're going to see everything spit out here. So it's going to this subscription, this resource group, this location, that's the name. And again, this has to be globally unique, which is why I put a bunch of zeros there. I've got a couple of ways of doing that inside a couple of scripts that I've got. And then it's just talking about the data protection down here, the advanced, and it's clicking on create. And then you can go into the resource group itself. And this doesn't take terribly long to deploy.
Like creating a storage is kind of quick.
Yeah.
And I love right now even in the portal we have so much tools built in now. It used to be much more complicated to interact with storage. And now there's a
Yes.
lot of toolings already present from the Azure portal. You could go there and have a glimpse of what's happening.
Correct. Yeah. So it's not quite there
There's
yet.
better tool, but if you just want to see or just upload one more file or download one file, if it's just not an emergency but like a ad hoc kind of execution, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. So I think I'll talk through a little bit of this overview blade here, or this pane, I think is the better way of describing it, because blade is kind of confusing. Like, well, it's not a blade. This is a pane, like a kind of window pane. The overview shows up for, I think, every resource now inside of Azure. And this showcases a lot of getting started pieces right here. So everything from containers to file shares, tables, queues, kind of all of your metadata, right? So it's a GRS storage account. So the primary is available, the secondary is available, the performance tier, the replication pattern, the account kind. This is an awesome workbook that essentially showcases ingress, egress, the end-to-end latency, and the transactions. Yeah. So that's a really big key here, especially if you're building an app and you're shoving a bunch of data into Azure. You may want to understand performance bottlenecks, because this might not be the right storage for your solution, especially if you need that data to be ingested very quickly, right? So that's always a big conversation point. In fact, we've got a lot of folks in the engineering teams that work with customers to make sure that they land successfully on storage, because they're dealing in petabytes. I have yet to put anything on the storage account, right? But we've got capacity to store petabytes of data, and we want to make sure that you're as successful as possible in adopting the platform. And so these types of kind of, I guess, views into how your storage account is performing become really helpful. And then there's also here, designations of going into the PowerShell documentation, the Azure CLI, .NET, Java, Python, Node.js. There's more, but these are the ones that I think are probably most frequently used.
Yeah,
right?
The more popular.
Correct.
Definitely more. So Shirley Dev is asking, don't be sorry, Shirley Dev. We also came late to the show today. So we kind of, start right away, kind of rushing a little bit at the beginning. So he's asking, does storage is the place for your application data? So Azure storage is everywhere. Is the how do you say that? The Dale in the middle of everything? I don't know how to translate.
Yeah, do you want me to show the slide?
Yeah, show that slide.
I'll show the slide again. So I think
storage
this
is the base really of everything else, is the foundation of all other services in Azure. And right now we were exploring a storage account. So when you create a storage account, you have access to all of that. Sometimes it's hidden from you, and sometimes, like when you create a storage account, that you're in the middle of it, and it will give you access to blob storage or table storage. So Shirley Dev is aware of one of a project I did on my personal Twitch stream, where I did the URL shortener, and I'm using table storage to store information. So I'm using the table inside this storage account, the basic storage account.
Yeah, and I think the another interesting slide to show. Let me go back. Oh, it's a little bit farther back than I. Oops, hang on. Okay, I'm going all the way back. But this is essentially how we splice it and dice it at Microsoft, right? So disk storage, object storage, file storage, data transport. So getting all of those big petabytes of data into Azure, as well as hybrid storage, because a lot of our customers are still in that state and will be for some time. This is the thing I was going to showcase here, right? So the lines of delineation. So we still have IaaS, and we will for some time. Those are, I call them, they're more legacy-based apps, or they're commercial off-the-shelf apps, or they're things that have yet to gone through cloud-native development cycles, because every journey, I think everybody would like to be as to the far right as possible, but getting there is hard because technical debt is ever present. And so that's a big...
It depends on the skill of your teams.
True. You can tell I work a lot with folks that just let it all pile up, and now it's this big huge mountain of technical debt that nobody wants to touch.
Well, I am a developer. My background is developer, so yes, I prefer as PaaS as possible. But if your team is all infra and stuff like that, then like yeah, you will love like the containers and the IaaS, like VMs and things like that, because that's where you're more comfortable. So
Correct.
And it's good. I think you're like the smallest are your pieces, the closer you will be to that curve of demand, and like that's why we go in the cloud, because we could scale up and scale down and everything. So if you play with big blocks, let's say big VMs, it's harder to follow. You always over provisioning on under provisioning.
Correct.
So the smaller are your blocks, like going to PaaS then, or like if you go serverless, like that's PaaS, like then like it's tiny little blocks, so it's easier to be like super close to that curve. But there's no bad answers. Like there's like PaaS is not better than IaaS. It's just it depends on the skills you have in the house.
Yeah, and I mean, I think maybe I'm thinking about it from that C-level executive decision, right? Somebody at some point wants to see that return on investment, and sometimes you don't see that when you think about version 1.0 of a digital transformation. That's literally a lift and shift, right? So like for like. And sometimes, and now we've got ways of thinking about cost management and things of that sort, right? Especially on the licensing front and the reserved instances. So that tends to help. You even have reserved capacity on storage. So all of those archives that we were talking about earlier, those would be great candidates for reserved capacity, right? Or the storage you have to have around for a while. I actually don't think you can do it on archive, because archive's pretty cheap. I think it's cool. You have to think about placing reserved capacity on, especially if it's going to sit around for years and years and years, but maybe accessed very infrequently. Yep. So, but I like this designation here because it showcases that storage spreads between all of these different realms. Yep. And to go one step farther, we were talking about this earlier, and I'm kind of rehashing it because we had some folks join a little bit later. But when you deploy something like Cosmos DB or AKS, storage is baked into that solution. You don't have to worry about picking the right storage. Kind of gone are the days of making sure that you're on the right disk array, the right SAN, the right NAS, the right performance storage. That's sort of gone. There's ways to think about storage now that are a lot different. And if you wanted to, you could focus on the storage account as it stands. That's still an opportunity for you to realize the value of what storage brings. Mm-hmm. But a lot of our PaaS-based services have storage built in, which is kind of a cool reality. Yeah. So let's see. So I think Okay. So I was going to showcase a little bit here on the left. Like most of our resources, a lot of the control happens over on the left. And this is all, you can control it in code, you can control it in a script. It's really up to you. But I think visually stepping through it makes a little bit of sense. So out the gate, you get 2 keys. Now, granted, I have AZ mask on, but you can hide. I could have hid the keys, but I've got AZ mask on right now, so I'll leave it on. But what shows up here is you get the storage account name, you get key 1, key 2. These get generated at the point of a storage account creation. This is the connection string, right? If something happens to key 2, you can regenerate. It's as simple as doing that. You could also do it in code. You could do it regularly. Microsoft does recommend doing it at a time that makes the most sense. The only thing to make note of is, when you're switching out keys, you might run the risk of an application going down because maybe it's using the connection string of the old key. So that's the only thing to pay attention to. But these are fantastic ways of getting somebody into your storage account in a way in which the administrator has control over their access levels. Yep. This is the geo-replication. Let's see. So this is, like I had mentioned earlier, each storage account gets provision with each one of these endpoints. So whether or not you use it's up to you. But each of those endpoints exists as part of the service. And if you needed to turn it on, right, you wanted to use table storage, you wanted to use the queue service, you have capacity to do it and spin it out in a way that makes sense for the app that you're building. CORS I'm not super familiar with CORS, but I know this relates to web application, communication, and access to the underlying storage.
Yes. So like if you have a website and they are in different domain name, you may want to have your application access some blob storage or some stuff like that to access some images or things like that. So you need to give it access. So with course, it's cross. What's the
Origin,
acronym?
I think, is an origin, cross origin,
Read services. I forgot.
something like that.
So yeah, like it's when your application in a different domain is reaching out, so you could give it certain permission, so they could read that, access your storage. So if I'm building a website and I'm using Azure as a storage to put my big images or stuff like that, then I need to give access to that. So I will enable the course and give specific access.
Yeah. And that's usually, and you can do it for blob, file, queue, or table, depending upon what you're looking to do. So there's flexibility here surrounding extra permissioning.
Yep.
This is the configuration. This is where you could turn off secure transfer. You could turn off public access. You could make it be where somebody needs the keys that I showed you earlier, or a SaaS token, or RBAC, right? So, or not RBAC, Azure Active Directory with RBAC controls. That's probably the better way of wording it. So you could think about turning that on. And this is where you could specify the TLS version, the access tier. You could even change this, which is kind of cool. You used to have to do this less in the GUI format, more in the code kind of format. So now there's a lot of this baked in. I think that goes to show we really are building a boat for anybody to get on at any point in their journey in IT. It's not just the savvy devs like Frank. It's also the IT pros that are kind of trying to figure out how to make all of this work. So, but I think that this is a super cool extra kind of newer feature that I like.
Yep.
You also have capacity to think about Azure Active Directory domain services. You could turn that on. You could also turn on authentication via Active Directory domain services. And yes, the traditional legacy-based authentication mechanism where everything lives on-prem. So you have capacity to think about accessing this a bunch of different ways, and that's kind of a cool reality. Whereas before it was mostly SaaS tokens and the actual storage keys, but now we've got this feature-rich capacity to think about Azure Active Directory, Azure Active Directory domain services, regular Active Directory domain services, as well as you can specify the TLS version, HTTPS, is it going to be publicly accessible, etc. Let's see. So when is object storage going to support SSL with custom domains? That I don't know. But I would imagine since we're talking about custom domains, you could probably do some funkiness with the CNAME. I don't know if that's something that...
You can. SSL with custom domain?
Yeah, for like a static website?
For a static website, that's a different story. But for for the storage... That's not a problem, I think.
Yeah, I would imagine you could do some work with like CNAMEs and just making sure that it's pointing correctly in wherever your DNS registrar is.
Yeah.
It's not, if you think about it, it's not super awesome because I think everybody would like it to show up in the service outright. I don't know if you've ever tried to do like a user vote, right? Is that what it's called? Or like to upvote it? That I don't know if that's out there, but it's worthy of exploring. But I think, it's not possible. All right. Yeah, I don't know if that, I don't know when that would come. I haven't heard anything that would lead me down the path of knowing specifically. So, apologies.
And is Azure storage a blob storage? I know about Amazon S3. So yes, so Azure storage is many things, and it's a blob storage. So it's like S3.
Yes.
The blob storage will be like S3.
Yeah. In fact, when I've gone and talked to customers who were over in AWS and had the conversation of how do they be multi-cloud, I usually do the translation of Azure Blob Storage is, Microsoft's version of S3. The official response is
yeah, it's
CDN.
true. Because I did that with I did for my blog, and I'm using a CDN, but I didn't really need a CDN, but just use it for having that HTTPS.
I didn't even think about that.
It's true. You're right, Wet Steel.
Okay. You learn something new every day. And like I joked again, I mean, I know a lot of devy things, but I never did it professionally prior to now. So I'm kind of like a small toddler when it comes to development cycles and even CDN in general, right? It's kind of got an interesting stretch between development and infrastructure, but it's something that I never supported one prior to dealing with it with customers after I moved into Azure. And I'd always bring a dev buddy in with me because I could only go so deep, right? Yeah. It's hard to know everything. If only we could, right? This is kind of cool. So we could consider letting Microsoft manage the keys here, right? But a lot of our customers were really concerned with that. You know, the big security firms, they didn't want to trust Microsoft. Fine. You could think about customer managed keys. You could select it from Key Vault. You could enter a key URI. So you'd have to specify the key vault and key. Just, I mean, that's what we're gonna. That's what we're gonna have to. That's what we're gonna have to do, Wetzel. We're gonna have to continue to pull their arm until they give in.
Or gently, kind of, you know.
Yeah, we can't because we want them to do it, right? We have to incentivize them.
And like the fingers are attached to the hands. Was attached
that
to
would
the
be
arms.
potentially
so if we
coding
broke
the service,
arms,
right?
Like they won't be able to code.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, I guess they could try with their toes, but I don't think anybody types well with their toes. So.
Yeah. So
then
we only have 5 minutes to the end. Do you want to try to answer the questions from
sure.
Shabel? How does access control work for the Azure storage? Maybe you
Sure. Sure, let me go back to it real quick here. It's fine, I didn't really change anything. So by default, this is turned on. And that means if I were to place a container in here with files, those could be accessible. If I gave you a URI, you'd be able to grab whatever I was going to do. And I think we will have to do another one of these because I did have some funny pictures I was going to make publicly accessible, and then I was going to remove the public accessibility, and then I was going to force folks to use a SaaS token. So, you know, by default, it's open.
Just like
right?
the website, the public folder and website.
Correct.
So it's perfect when you're creating a blob storage, you put a bunch of images or stuff like that, and you want your website to consume it and everything. That's perfect. So that's the default by default.
Correct. And then if you wanted to focus on, you know, SaaS tokens, and that's just essentially, it's a shared access signature token. It's down here. Yep. You could do that. I'm going to hit cancel. Or you could have them require Active Directory or Azure Active Directory to be able to access those blobs. Mm-hmm. That's becoming more of the de facto standard related to what we recommend, because identity is the new perimeter, and a lot of customers are already integrating with Azure Active Directory as their IDP. So it makes sense for you to think about leaning on that. But if you had a lot of, you know, maybe there were freelance developers or they didn't really have an Office 365 tenant, you still could lean on a shared access signature token. That would still work.
Yeah, totally. So if you have reports or information, you want your service to have, or person to have access for a limited time, or only like the people like forever, but just like if they are authenticated, then you could use this kind of security. And if you're trying and you don't have access, then you'll have the proper answer, say, yep, no access, access denied. So that way will be very secure.
Yeah. And, you know, it's on by default because a lot of times customers are trying to kick the tire to build that familiarity, right? They're trying to make sure they understand what they're doing, how they're building it, all of the above. And so it's just enabled by default. But to disable it is a matter of just, you know, going to disabled here. It's codable, so it could be a PowerShell script, it could be an AZCLI script, it could be an ARM template, it could be an actual C# app that builds out a storage account. All of this is possible.
JavaScript.
And so it's, JavaScript, yep.
So many things.
I know, right? Exactly. It can be everything to everyone.
Yeah. Let's pause here because I want to be respectful of our schedule.
Okay.
So I'll go to the side-by-side view now, so we don't see your screen anymore, just in case you want to still showcase something. So, chat, thank you, all of us, all of you to be here with us today. If you have any questions, please reach out to her Twitter handle just here. Shannon will be happy to answer you, and I will make sure to reschedule another episode where we will be able. How did I call that earlier? It was the storage episode for the haha moment. I was trying to play, but it didn't work very well.
It works.
Try to come back. And Shannon, thank you so much for spending this hour and a half with us today, sharing your wisdom about storage.
Sure.
It was
Thanks for
awesome.
having me.
Thank you all. And we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.